attending a friend's funeral only to take her school-aged son home. I had intended to leave after the burial ceremony, but watching the boy surrounded by a group of adults, I leaned against a nearby tree and listened for a while. These people were clearly trying to seize the house and money, with no intention of giving the boy any of his mother's inheritance. I glanced at the smiling photo on the headstone, inwardly scoffing. You naive fool. I told you relatives couldn't be trusted, but you wouldn't listen. Now they're bullying your orphan son. But I had no intention of intervening. My debt was to his mother, not to him. I was merely curious to see how he would react, wondering if he might beg those people with tears in his eyes. Instead, he just stood there with his head down, not saying a word. Boring. I dusted off my hands, ready to head home. Suddenly, he lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, with a hint of defiant wariness in them. In that moment, I saw myself from years ago, looking just like that, like a cornered dog ready to bite. Hey, want to come live with me? I raised an eyebrow and smiled at him. Only then did the group of aggressive adults notice that I, an outsider, was still present. Their faces flashed with discomfort before quickly turning to anger. This is a family matter. Ignoring them, I walked up to the boy, my smile fading. I'm a friend of your mom's. She did me a favor once. I can take you in, but... I glanced at the others present, emphasizing each word. Any inheritance they've stolen, you'll have to reclaim yourself when you're able. I won't help you with that. The crowd erupted, shouting that I was talking nonsense. I just kept my eyes on the boy. Of course, you can choose to go with them instead. It's your decision. In the end, he came home with me. After settling him in the guest room, a sense of unease washed over me at having a stranger invade my personal space. I shouldn't have brought him back. I retreated to my study in frustration, hoping to ease my emotions through sketching. The next morning, I was awakened by a WhatsApp message from a client. This was the first project we'd taken on since establishing our design studio. When I say studio, it's really just me and my friend Bronte Elston. The client was difficult to please, but thankfully, they were finally satisfied with last night's revised draft. I rubbed my stiff neck and walked out of the study. Catching sight of a silent figure by the dining table in the living room, I jumped in fright. I was genuinely annoyed. What are you doing sitting there without making a sound? He seemed startled for a moment, as if frightened by my sudden outburst of morning grumpiness. Then, trying to appear composed, he pushed a piece of paper on the table towards me. I'm sorry, I'll be more mindful in future. This is an agreement I've drafted. You can take a look. Bewildered, I walked over and sat opposite him, picking up the paper. I almost laughed out loud. The Party A section was blank. Party B, Barnaby Eastham. The agreement essentially stated that all living expenses and secondary school fees incurred by Party B while staying at Party A's home would be repaid with interest within 1 year of Party B's university graduation. I glanced at him over the paper, feeling mischievous. How can you be sure you'll be able to repay everything just 1 year after university? Raising children is very expensive these days. And why only secondary school fees? Don't I need to cover university tuition and living expenses as well? Barnaby's face reddened, and he stammered, we can add a clause stating that if it's not repaid by the deadline, the interest will double. Then he anxiously explained, I promise I'll repay it, don't worry. My grades are quite good, I can apply for scholarships at university. During secondary school, I can work part-time on weekends and holidays. I can also. That's enough. The more I listened, the more absurd it became. It's not like I can't afford to support him. And he's thinking about working part-time? There are so many unscrupulous employers out there, just waiting to exploit student workers, finding ways to withhold their wages. I've been through it, he doesn't need to experience that too. Just focus on your studies, don't even think about part-time work. I have money, I can support you. There's no need to sign this agreement either. Consider it me repaying your mother's kindness. I put the agreement back on the table and stood up, intending to go freshen up. If you don't sign it, I won't stay here. How annoying, why is he being so fussy? I wanted to shout at him. But seeing the seriousness and stubbornness in Barnaby's eyes, and the boys straight back in the morning light, I suddenly realized this wasn't just a dead agreement, it was the last shred of dignity for this stray dog. I sat back down and swiftly signed my name in the Party A section, Cecily Fairclough. I glanced at him. I reckon your ungrateful relatives have already moved into your house by now. I'll take you back to get anything you can't bear to part with. From now on, you can call me Cecily. I hesitated, unsure. Given our age difference and relationship, calling me Mrs. Fairclough seemed too formal, but Cecily felt a bit odd too. Cecily, I'll go make breakfast then. With that, he stood up and walked towards the kitchen fridge. All right, using my first name works too. But in the next second, he turned back to look at me, unable to hide his shock. I'd forgotten that in my fridge, apart from alcohol, there was only more alcohol. In the end, we went out for breakfast, then returned to his original home to collect his things. I didn't go upstairs. In less than half an hour, Barnaby came down with only his mother's photo, some books, and clothes. He didn't look well, his eyes a bit red. We drove to the supermarket. I let him choose things for himself while I waited at the checkout. Bronte called. As soon as I answered, I frowned and held the phone away from my ear. Darling! I need comfort, she wailed on the other end. I sighed, my friend, please control your volume or I'll have to charge you for hearing damage. My dad tricked me into another blind date. We just had a row. Darling, I'm sleeping at yours tonight, she fake sobbed. No room at mine. The guest room's occupied. What? Cecily Fairclough, have you started keeping secret lovers? What a wild imagination. I explained the situation to her, feeling quite exasperated. She listened, making sympathetic noises, and then insisted on treating Barnaby to a Sunday roast, saying she felt sorry for him and wanted to feed him up properly. When Barnaby came out, he hadn't bought many toiletries but had a basket full of groceries. I looked at him quizzically. He explained quietly, I'll do the cooking from now on. Eating out is expensive and not as clean. In the car, I told Barnaby about Bronte's invitation for a Sunday roast. He didn't seem to mind, saying it was fine. On the way to the pub, I silently prayed that Bronte would keep her wild speculations to herself. Entering the pub, I immediately spotted Bronte waving frantically at us, her eyes lighting up when she saw Barnaby. Resigned, I led Barnaby over and made introductions. Barnaby, this is your Auntie Bronte. The woman across from us bristled. What do you mean, Auntie? Don't listen to her nonsense, Barnaby dear. I'm your big sister Bronte. Barnaby obliged, calling her sister as she wished, before she shooed him off to get drinks. I knew she wanted to talk to me alone. Bronte's smile faded, and she looked at me seriously. Cecily Fairclough, tell me honestly, have you fallen for Barnaby's good looks? Are you playing some kind of grooming game? He's underage. I gave her a look reserved for idiots and took a sip of water, not dignifying that with a response. She weakly continued her guessing. Don't tell me you want to be his mom? I choked on my water, nearly spitting it out. Bronte hurriedly passed me some napkins. I'm just talking rubbish. You hate hassle, don't you? Don't tell me it's to repay a debt. I know you keep things separate. You wouldn't take in her son just because his mom helped you years ago. She's right, I wouldn't. So why did I impulsively bring him home? Was it because when our eyes met that day, I saw a reflection of my younger self in him? I don't know. For the rest of the meal, with Bronte there, the conversation never lulled. Barnaby's face turned red several times from her teasing. Before we got in the car to leave, Bronte pulled me aside. Looking at Barnaby in the passenger seat, she whispered, I don't know why you brought him home, and if you don't want to say, I won't ask. Raising a child isn't easy. If you need anything in the future, just tell your sister. Don't shoulder it all alone, okay? I put my arm around her and drawled in her ear, I know, fussy Auntie Bronte. She swatted my hand away in embarrassment, finally letting me go. The aroma of dinner woke me from my slumber. Rubbing my eyes groggily, I wandered into the living room. Under the warm glow of the lamps, Barnaby was bringing dish after dish out from the kitchen. Gazing at the table laden with food, I looked up at him in confusion. Had I brought home a magical house elf? Barnaby seemed a bit embarrassed. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I made a bit of everything. I'm afraid I got carried away. Sorry about that. I waved my hand to indicate it was fine and sat down at the table, still a bit dazed. So this is what it feels like to have someone cook for you at home? In the days that followed, Barnaby and I didn't interact much. Most of the time, I was holed up in my study working on illustrations, occasionally heading to the studio to meet clients with Bronte. Since Barnaby's arrival, the house had remained spotlessly clean, and a few small potted plants had appeared on the balcony. 2 weeks later, it was time for Barnaby to start school. On the day I took him to register, I learned from his teacher that he had placed first in his year on the previous term's exams. I glanced at the young lad, noticing his reddened ear tips and slightly straighter posture. I couldn't help but smile to myself. He was rather like a cat. As the school was close to home, we decided after consulting with him that he would be a day student. And so, Barnaby officially began his second year of sixth form, while I threw myself wholeheartedly into work at the studio. Before I knew it, the summer bank holiday had arrived. I hadn't expected to fall ill on the first day of the holiday. It was probably due to the intense focus on the studio work lately. As soon as I relaxed, my body gave in. Barnaby had left early that morning for a school training camp and wouldn't be home for the entire holiday. I rummaged through the living room cabinet for some medicine, swallowed it with cold water, and stumbled back to bed in a daze. When I next awoke, it was from thirst. I vaguely heard sounds of someone rummaging around in the living room. Mustering my strength, I grabbed a thick book and crept towards the living room. Our eyes met, and I awkwardly lowered the book I had raised. Barnaby? Why was he back? Before I could ask, Barnaby approached me with pursed lips, holding a thermometer. You have a fever, he said, his expression darkening as he looked at the display. No wonder I felt so achy. Why are you back? I managed to ask. Barnaby turned to put the thermometer in a drawer, then picked up the medicine on the table and examined it. I came back for a book I'd forgotten. When I saw the medicine in the living room, I guessed you were ill, so I asked the teacher for leave from the training camp. I frowned. I can take care of myself. You should go back to the camp. He picked up the glass I had drunk from earlier and looked at me. So this is how you take care of yourself? Drinking cold water and taking random medicine? I was momentarily speechless, feeling as if our roles had been reversed. We're out of fever reducers. I'll go buy some. There's hot water in the kitchen, have some first. With that, he took the keys and left. I sat on the sofa, lost in thought. I had once undergone emergency surgery for acute appendicitis, staying in the hospital alone. When Bronte found out afterwards, she berated me with tears in her eyes for not treating her as a friend. But that wasn't it. I just wasn't used to relying on others. Subconsciously, I avoided forming close relationships with anyone. The sound of the door opening snapped me out of my muddled thoughts. Barnaby entered, slightly out of breath, fine beads of sweat on his forehead. He had run back. He went to the kitchen to pour a fresh cup of hot water, then crouched in front of me, carefully reading the medicine instructions. I watched him do all this, my face expressionless. The feeling of being cared for was utterly foreign to me. In the end, Barnaby didn't return to the training camp. Under his supervision, I recovered quickly. I had suggested he go out and spend time with friends during the holiday. But he just shook his head, choosing to stay home with me. On the last day of the holiday, Bronte showed up at our door with bags of groceries, looking dejected. The first thing she said when she saw me was, "Darling, that woman is back in the country." The woman Bronte referred to was our university classmate, Agatha. Although Bronte was reluctant to admit it, her aversion to blind dates all these years was, to some extent, because of Agatha. As an observer, I understood their entanglement but felt it wasn't my place to say anything. Neither Bronte nor I were particularly good cooks, so Barnaby ended up taking the groceries into the kitchen. Bronte took a sip of wine, looking somewhat defeated. She called me saying she wants to reconcile. She slammed her glass down on the coffee table, exclaiming heatedly, "Who does she think she is? What makes her think I'd wait for her? I've got plenty of young lads lining up for me to dote on. Seeing her feigned nonchalance, I deliberately reached out my hand and said, well then, give me your phone. I'll call her and tell her not to bother you anymore. Bronte froze for a second, then clutched her phone to her chest like a little hamster, looking slightly hurt. What are you doing? You're teasing me too. I sighed. I'm asking you to face your true feelings. But she can't just disappear abroad for years without a word, then come back with a casual let's make up as if those years apart never happened. Bronte said, her head lowered, voice choked. I moved closer and pulled her into my arms. All right, then take some time to reconsider her. By the time Barnaby brought out the Sunday roast, Bronte had finished a bottle of wine. At the table, she insisted on getting Barnaby to drink with her. I smiled helplessly. He's still a child, he shouldn't be drinking. But Bronte was undeterred. Barnaby's almost of age, a little drink won't hurt. Oh come on, Cecily, don't be such a stick in the mud. Then I watched as Barnaby discreetly passed her his glass. The meal dragged on for a long time. Although Bronte was laughing and joking throughout, I knew she was hurting inside. By the end, Barnaby was a bit tipsy, while Bronte suddenly threw a drunken fit, insisting that Agatha come to pick her up. Faced with these two drunks, one big and one small, my temples throbbed. I first helped Barnaby back to his room. Before lying down, he mumbled that I shouldn't worry about cleaning up, he'd do it in the morning. I chuckled, thinking his personality was rather like an old man's. Back in the living room, I crouched in front of Bronte and took her hand. Are you sure you want to call her now? I know you're not really drunk. Bronte fell silent. After a long while, she finally spoke. I miss her. I stroked her head and said softly, all right, I understand. I took her phone and called Agatha, giving her my address. About half an hour later, the doorbell rang. Bronte, who had been slumped over, suddenly sat up straight, then poured herself another glass of wine before slumping back down. I shook my head helplessly and went to open the door. The woman outside, unseen for years, had an even stronger air of cool detachment about her, but her eyes betrayed unmistakable anxiety. We nodded at each other, and I stepped aside to let her in. She walked quickly towards Bronte, taking her into her arms and calling her name softly. Her cool demeanor melted away, revealing a tenderness reserved only for Bronte. I watched them from the entryway, suddenly feeling as if I'd been transported back to university. Back then, Bronte often pretended to be drunk, always having me call Agatha to come get her. The cool, aloof girl would always rush over, carefully coaxing the drunk girl. The scene before me overlapped with my memories, as if nothing had changed. Agatha half carried, half supported Bronte towards the door. I watched Bronte, who was pretending to be unconscious as she buried her face in Agatha's neck. Suddenly, I spoke up. Agatha, Bronte is my dearest friend. This is the last time I'll help you. That was all that needed to be said. They both understood. She turned to look at me seriously. Thank you. The next day, I went to the studio. I watched Bronte Elston arrive late, sporting a love bite on her neck. My eyes twinkled with amusement, but I didn't say a word. She and Agatha seemed to be playing a game of push and pull with a predetermined ending. To be honest, I envied Bronte's courage. I envied her ability to place her heart in someone else's hands. Unlike me, who seemed to have lost the ability to love someone. Christmas Eve arrived before we knew it. I received an unexpected phone call. The man on the other end was my father. I don't know how he got my number. When I answered, he only said one thing. Your stepmother was tidying up and found a letter your mum left for you. Come and get it yourself. Then he hung up. The stepmother he mentioned was technically my stepmother, barely 10 years older than me. I sent Barnaby Eastham a message, but ultimately decided to drive back to that home. It was that woman who opened the door. The letter, I said, still standing at the doorstep with no intention of entering. My father walked over from the living room, his tone unfriendly. Can't you greet people properly? Restraining the urge to leave immediately, I repeated, the letter. The woman, seemingly worried we might start arguing, hurried back to the living room. When she reappeared, she was holding an envelope, her eyes filled with an attempt at placation as she tentatively asked, "Won't you stay for dinner before you go?" My patience exhausted, I snatched the letter from her hand and turned to leave. Behind me, I could hear my father's dissatisfied voice. "Why did you ask her to stay?" "As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a daughter." I didn't stop walking until I was back in my car, only then realizing that the hand holding the letter was trembling slightly. The process of opening the letter felt like it was in slow motion. Until the first line of familiar handwriting came into view. "Cecily, don't burden yourself with the issues between your father and me." I abruptly folded the letter, losing the courage to read on. My mom was a gentle, book-loving woman, while my father was a businessman who only knew how to make money. Years ago, my father had fallen in love with Mom at first sight and pursued her relentlessly, but Mom wasn't interested. However, my father managed to convince my grandmother, and in the end, under my grandmother's pressure, Mom married my father. At first, my father treated Mom exceptionally well, and we had a period of genuine happiness as a family. But later, as Mom's health gradually deteriorated, my father began having affairs with other women. Mom asked for a divorce, but my father refused, letting the situation drag on. Later, Mom's condition worsened and she was hospitalized. My father became even more brazen, openly bringing his mistresses home. Until that day, when Mom's condition became critical and I was alone outside the operating theater. With red eyes, I kept dialing my father's mobile over and over. I sent countless messages, begging him to come to the hospital. But all the calls and messages went unanswered until my phone died. The light in the operating theater went out, and Mom was wheeled out, her body covered with a white sheet. In my ears, the nurse's voice repeated, "Where's your father?" I remained silent, just staring intently in the direction they were taking Mom, my eyes burning. Later, my father did show up, with telltale marks on his neck. It turned out that while Mom was lying on the operating table, he was in bed with another woman at home. I couldn't understand. He had loved Mom so much at first, how could he have changed his heart? Less than a month after Mom passed away, my father announced he wanted to marry that woman. I objected and started causing trouble, but my father said if I didn't agree, I should get out. My grandparents had passed away early, so I tried to reach out to Mom's other relatives, hoping they would stand up for what was right. But they had all been bought off by my father. On the day my father married that woman, I ran away from home. I was 16 years old. After that, I never went back to that house. To support myself, I took all sorts of temporary jobs. Many unscrupulous employers liked to hire minors because we were cheap and easy to bully. Those days were tough, but at least I could support myself. Later, I met Barnaby's mother. She was kind and, despite my wariness, gently yet firmly pulled me out of the quagmire, supporting me to go back to school. Barnaby? I suddenly snapped out of my memories. Barnaby was still waiting for me at home for Christmas Eve dinner. I put away the letter and drove home. As I opened the door, my eyes met Barnaby's, who was standing in the warm light of the living room. He looked into my eyes for a long time, then went into the kitchen to reheat the food. I was grateful he didn't ask anything. Not long after the new term started, I noticed something odd about Barnaby Eastham. Lately, when he came home, he always had an expression as if he wanted to say something but couldn't quite get it out. But when I looked at him, he would avoid my gaze. This state of affairs continued until Thursday evening. As I came out of the bathroom, I felt a gaze from the living room. "Out with it. What's the matter?" I asked. Barnaby started to back down again. Nothing at all." I was getting a bit irritated. "If it's nothing, stop sneaking glances at me, it's annoying." "I'll ask you one more time, what's going on?" "Tomorrow, there's a parents' evening," he said, then lowered his head. I was taken aback. So this is what he'd been fretting about for days? I wasn't opposed to attending, but I had a meeting with someone tomorrow. I hesitated, not saying anything for a moment. He quickly noticed my hesitation and quietly tried to make excuses for me. "It's all right, I know you're busy. You don't have to go." He wanted me to go, otherwise he wouldn't have been conflicted for so long. Realizing this, I thought for a moment and asked, "What time?" Barnaby's eyes lit up, and he spoke rapidly. 10 in the morning. "You can have a bit of a lie-in. I don't have early classes tomorrow, We can leave together. The next second, Barnaby averted his gaze, but his face turned red. I laughed, leaning in to tease him deliberately. Oh, your face is so red. He stood up abruptly, stammering, I'm going to my room to study. He walked past me towards his room, his feet and hands moving in unison. The next day, after Barnaby led me to the classroom, he left. I sat bored in my seat, flipping through his textbooks, waiting for it to begin. Suddenly, a shrill female voice came from behind me. Oh my, I wonder what tricks some women use to bewitch our little Barnaby, making him forget all about his family. I turned to look at the source of the voice. The woman's heavily made-up face still wore a mocking expression. I was a bit confused, wondering when I had offended this character. The woman turned to continue talking to the person next to her, making sure her voice carried to everyone's ears. Barnaby's father passed away early, and now his mother's gone too. As his aunt, I kindly offered to raise him. But as soon as some woman shows up, our Barnaby's soul is stolen away. Who knows what their relationship really is? As soon as she finished speaking, sure enough, the looks from the people around changed. I didn't care, but Barnaby didn't deserve these baseless speculations. I quickly ran through the people at the cemetery that day in my mind, then glanced at her. You're very noisy. Before she could speak, I added, that day at the cemetery, when you lot were forcing Barnaby to make a choice, I was there as a friend of Barnaby's mom. You all said you wanted to raise Barnaby, but between the lines, it was clear as day that you wanted to swallow up the inheritance his mom left him. You're quite the aunt, aren't you? The woman, upon hearing this, became agitated. What nonsense are you spouting, you outsider? I'm his aunt, do you think I'd harm him? I smiled, took out my phone, and made as if to press something. I recorded everything on my phone that day. She panicked and instinctively reached out to grab the phone. Just then, the form teacher arrived. The woman breathed a sigh of relief and stammered, I can't be bothered to argue with you. With that, she walked back to her seat. I graciously didn't pursue the matter, but I also felt a bit relieved inside. Because I hadn't actually recorded anything, I was completely bluffing. However, thanks to her attempt to grab the phone just now, after this scene, I think anyone with eyes could understand what was really going on. As the parents' evening came to an end, Aunt Theodora Eastham was the first to slip out of the classroom. After the crowd dispersed, I rose to leave but was stopped by a girl. She seemed to have mustered up all her courage. Is what Mrs. Eastham said true? Are you and Barnaby that kind of relationship? The young girl's voice trembled, but she stared at me, demanding an answer. I'm guessing you like Barnaby, or want to be friends with him? I leaned against a desk, smiling as I asked. The girl's face visibly reddened, but she didn't respond. I straightened up, my tone becoming a bit stern. It's foolish to make baseless assumptions about someone based on a few words from others. If you truly like him or want to be his friend, you should approach him openly and honestly, rather than trying to guess about him through me or others behind his back. Seeing the girl's face turn pale, I softened. We're not the kind of relationship you're thinking of. I'm just a friend of his mother's. I know you mean no harm, but don't try to get to know someone through other people's mouths. With that, I walked past her towards the door. I had already been delayed too long. As I walked, I took out my mobile to send Barnaby a WhatsApp message saying I had to leave early. But the next second, I saw Barnaby standing at the corner. Had he heard everything? The girl also noticed Barnaby's presence and ran out in a fluster. "Aw, youth." Seeing Barnaby's impassive expression, I joked, "Aren't you going to chase after your little girlfriend?" He gave me an inscrutable look and uttered, "Childish." I often feel like I can't understand Barnaby. Sometimes he shows the restraint and caution of someone living under another's roof, but other times he inadvertently reveals a maturity and sharpness. And I always feel the latter is the real him. Oh well, never mind. I have to go now, I said, hurrying towards the car park. After a few steps, I heard footsteps following behind. Why are you still following me? Don't you have classes this afternoon? I turned around, looking at him quizzically. Barnaby quickened his pace to walk beside me. The form tutor gave us the afternoon off. Then you should go home. Before I could finish, Barnaby interrupted. Where are you going? Can I come with you? He was acting strange today, unusually clingy. I thought for a moment, then leaned in conspiratorially. Do you know how to play chess? At this close distance, I could clearly see the momentary confusion and uncertainty in the boy's eyes. But he still nodded. So I drove him to the care home. Today I was going to visit my university professor, Mr. Yardley. On the way, I called the care home first. The old man was still holding a grudge against me for not visiting him for so long. The carer answered the phone. Through the receiver, I heard him deliberately speaking loudly, "Tell her not to come." I smiled helplessly and told the carer we'd be there in about half an hour. Barnaby remained very quiet throughout the journey, staring out the window, not even worried that I might be kidnapping him. When we reached Mr. Yardley's room, we saw the old man's stubborn yet deliberate back turned to us. I rubbed my brow and said dramatically, "Mr. Yardley, your star pupil has come to see you." The old man's shoulders shook slightly. He couldn't resist turning around, though he kept a stern face. "I don't have such a thick-skinned student." I gently pushed Barnaby forward, saying sweetly, "He knows how to play chess, you know." Sure enough, Mr. Yardley's eyes lit up. Professor Yardley had no children, and after his wife passed away, he never remarried. His only hobby was playing chess. Unfortunately, I wasn't skilled at the game. He had tried to teach me, but I simply lacked the talent, much to his disappointment. I sat watching them play for a few minutes before quietly excusing myself to speak with the doctor about the old man's condition. Afterwards, I paid for another year's care, knowing full well that Professor Yardley would scold me when he found out. Checking the time, I drove to his favorite pub to pick up some lunch, a hearty Sunday roast. When I returned, the two were still engrossed in their game. Professor Yardley furrowed his brow in concentration, while Barnaby seemed remarkably calm. Could it be? Was the professor struggling against Barnaby? As I laid out the food, Professor Yardley caught the aroma of the gravy and his eyes lit up. "Barnaby, lad, let's pause for lunch." In such a short time, they were already on first-name terms? I glanced at Barnaby, who shot me a proud little smile. After lunch, they finished their game, which ended in a draw. Barnaby and I wheeled Professor Yardley outside to enjoy the sunshine. When a breeze picked up, the old man refused to go back inside, so Barnaby went to fetch a blanket. As we watched Barnaby walk away, Professor Yardley suddenly spoke up, "That boy is quite something." I laughed. "You've only known him for a few hours and you're already singing his praises?" The professor replied seriously, "One's chess style reflects one's character. This lad plays a steady game, he's patient, doesn't resort to tricks, and carries himself well, though he does seem a bit nervous around you. Barnaby told me about your situation. It's quite the coincidence his mother helped you back then, and now you're helping him. I'm glad he's here to keep you company." Faced with this unexpected sentimentality, I felt a bit flustered. "You think so highly of him, I might get jealous." In the distance, we could see Barnaby approaching, carrying not only the blanket but my coat as well. Seeing this, the professor gave me a knowing look and said, "See? I told you he was a good lad." Barnaby had a remarkable ability to quickly win people over, like Bronte, and now Professor Yardley. On the drive home, Professor Yardley called. I put it on speaker, but immediately regretted it. His irate voice filled the car. "Did you pay for another year again? How many times must I tell you, I have money? You work hard for your wages, keep them for yourself. I'm going to have the care home refund you tomorrow." Usually, I wouldn't know how to respond, but this time I stood my ground. "If you do that, I won't bring Barnaby to play chess with you anymore." There was a moment of silence, then he hung up. Barnaby suddenly burst out laughing. A second later, I joined in. The weather was gradually becoming sultry. If it weren't for Bronte's call about our holiday plans, I would have almost forgotten that the summer break was just around the corner. "Cecily, come on, bring Barnaby and join me for a trip. You love surfing, don't you? Besides, Barnaby needs to relax too." I glanced at Barnaby, who was peeling fruit by the coffee table, and leaned back on the sofa lazily. "It's too hot this year. I don't feel like moving." Bronte howled on the other end of the line. "There'll be loads of fit lads at the beach, you know. Just imagine those perfectly toned muscle boys. Doesn't that excite you? I've even bought you a swimsuit that'll flatter your figure perfectly." It's a super sexy bikey and I. She practically shouted the last 3 words. I was certain Barnaby had heard it, because his ears suddenly turned red. He then handed me a peeled orange, softly enticing. Go on, then. When we saw Agatha behind Bronte at the airport, I wasn't surprised. Bronte pulled me aside and whispered, "This woman is terrifying." She showed up at my doorstep early in the morning with her suitcase, saying she wanted to come too. I glanced at the person in question, who, noticing my gaze, tucked her hair behind her ear, looking somewhat pitiful and forlorn. I've just returned to the country and don't have many friends. Mind if I join? You don't mind, do you? Bronte exploded upon hearing this. Oh, stop pretending. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. I patted Bronte. Let's all go together. The more, the merrier. Barnaby only greeted everyone at the beginning, then helped us with our luggage and check-in. Bronte leaned close to my ear, whispering mischievously, "When you two walked over just now, all I could think was what a perfect match. Get a grip, Auntie Bronte," I sighed. Bronte shot me an annoyed look, tossing back, "You're such an old fuddy-duddy," before turning away, ignoring me. After boarding the plane, Agatha had somehow managed to swap seats to sit next to Bronte. Accompanied by the sound of one sulking and the other gently coaxing, I gradually drifted off to sleep. The turbulence from the plane landing startled me awake. I opened my eyes groggily. I found myself leaning on Barnaby's shoulder, not quite sure how I'd ended up there. Noticing my movement, Barnaby turned his head, his warm breath tickling my ear. "Awake? We've arrived. Too close." I immediately sat up straight. My heart was racing a bit. Probably due to the weightless feeling from the plane's descent, I supposed. "What's wrong?" Barnaby looked at me intently. I avoided his gaze and shook my head. As we were walking out, I noticed Barnaby and Agatha making the same shoulder-rubbing gesture. Bronte and I, in unspoken agreement, said nothing. When we arrived at the hotel, Bronte only booked 2 rooms. Originally, Bronte and I were to share a room, while Barnaby would have his own. But now Agatha had joined us. Agatha went to the front desk to book a room, glancing hesitantly at Bronte. However, Bronte was too excited about the trip to notice. She linked arms with me and strode forward carelessly. Agatha followed behind, looking a bit dejected. I thought for a moment, then turned back to Agatha and winked. "Agatha, your stomach's acting up again, isn't it?" Agatha looked confused for a second before quickly catching on. She clutched her stomach and said weakly to Bronte, "Yes, it hurts so much." Bronte's expression changed instantly. She hurried over to support Agatha, asking worriedly, "How did your stomach start hurting so suddenly? Did you bring your medicine?" Agatha nestled into Bronte's arms, grasping her collar without directly answering, only whimpering softly about the pain. I chimed in at the right moment. "Bronte, why don't you share a room with Agatha so you can look after her? You two should rest now, and we can go out again in the evening." Bronte looked down at Agatha in her arms and agreed. As Barnaby and I headed to our own rooms, which were opposite each other, he suddenly spoke up, "You're all tricking Bronte, aren't you?" I put a finger to my lips and shook my head with a smile. "It's a secret." After another nap in my room, I woke to find the room bathed in the glow of the setting sun. Barnaby called to say Bronte and Agatha were already waiting in the lobby. When Bronte saw me, she let out a meaningful humph before dragging Barnaby ahead. Confused, I looked at Agatha, who had fallen behind. She gave me a rueful smile and explained, "I told her that I was faking the stomachache earlier." Agatha was wonderful in many ways, but sometimes she could be overly honest. After dinner, Bronte insisted on finding a place by the sea where we could sit and have drinks. Fine, she could have her way tonight. She continued pulling Barnaby along in front, the two of them whispering about something. Agatha and I followed behind at a leisurely pace. When we sat down, we discovered this place also served alcohol. Bronte ordered a soft drink for Barnaby but wanted me to drink with her. She even suggested we play a game. We were to sit at opposite ends of the bar and see who got approached more often. The loser would pay the bill. I instinctively glanced at Barnaby, then looked over at Agatha. Both of their expressions had darkened. I refused, saying, "No need to compete." I'll pay. Bronte glanced at Agatha, clearly unhappy. I'm still upset about what happened this afternoon. I realized Bronte was finding roundabout ways to upset Agatha. I looked apologetically at Agatha before agreeing, picking up my glass and heading towards the bar. Barnaby reached out to stop me, but Bronte glared at him. I patted his hand reassuringly. He reluctantly let go. While half-heartedly dealing with people who came to chat me up, I kept an eye on Bronte's side of the bar. She had already downed several drinks indiscriminately and looked close to being truly drunk. Just as I was about to end this pointless game and go get her, Agatha suddenly stood up. She strode purposefully towards Bronte, pulled her forcefully into her arms, and leaned down. Relieved, I turned my attention to finding an excuse to get rid of the persistent man asking for my WhatsApp. Sis, I'm here to take you back. I looked up in surprise at Barnaby, who had stepped between me and the man. It was the first time he'd called me sis. The interrupted man seemed annoyed, but hearing Barnaby call me sis made him unsure of our relationship. Still, he persisted in asking for my WhatsApp. As I was about to speak, Barnaby quickly rattled off a string of numbers, grabbed my wrist, and stared at me intently. Sis, he said, his tone dropping lower. I smiled at the man from behind Barnaby, feeling the grip on my wrist tighten. Barnaby seemed different tonight, exuding an indescribable aura. He was a bit intimidating. Once outside, Barnaby released my hand and walked silently beside me, head down. The sea breeze cleared my head a bit. That WhatsApp number you gave just now was yours, wasn't it? Don't do that again in the future. Instead of answering, Barnaby asked, did you want to give him yours? I laughed. Of course not. Even if you hadn't shown up, I would have found a way to get rid of him. WhatsApp numbers are personal information. You shouldn't give out yours either. But he said seriously, I'll be there. Every time from now on. I was surprised by his persistence. The boy had grown up, harboring thoughts I couldn't quite fathom. After a while, Barnaby Eastham suddenly called out from behind me, Cecily. I turned around, smiling at him. The sea breeze lifted my skirt and the young man's shirt. Amidst the twinkling lights of the town, the young man's eyes shone brightly as he spoke with determination and sincerity. My 18th birthday is coming up. May I ask for a wish from you then? The young man's earnestness, carried by the wind, inexplicably made me want to retreat. I stared at him, trying to see through his intentions. I lowered my gaze and thought, then after a moment's pause, we'll see. I didn't miss the fleeting disappointment in his eyes. The next day, it wasn't until the afternoon that Bronte Elston finally arrived, arm in arm with Agatha Goodfellow. Seeing her all bundled up, with even a small scarf around her neck, I asked with a hint of understanding, are you planning to go surfing in that? She leaned on Agatha's shoulder, saying weakly, no energy today, I'll just watch you play. Agatha's face was full of joy, gently rubbing Bronte's waist. I immediately understood and gave Agatha a thumbs up, causing Bronte's face to turn red as she tried to lunge at me. Barnaby couldn't swim, and Agatha was staying with Bronte, so in the end, I was the only one going into the water. Taking off my beach cover-up, Bronte looked me up and down, proudly saying, as expected of the outfit I chose, perfect. I was applying sunscreen, not intending to respond, but Bronte kept gesturing for me to look to the side. I only saw Barnaby glaring coldly at a few men who were looking over, like a wolf cub guarding its food. I patted his shoulder helplessly, this is the beach. He stood in front of me with a tense face, blocking the gazes from around us, as if I was enveloped in his embrace. Within my field of vision, I saw his Adam's apple bob up and down. I uncomfortably took half a step back, suddenly realizing he seemed to have grown much taller. Move over a bit. He seemed not to have heard. The next second, the dust particles in the sunlight seemed to dance vigorously as he took off his white t-shirt and held it out to me, wear this. The possessiveness in his tone was bordering on overstepping. I looked away, saying coldly, no need. But he wasn't about to give up. Lowering his head, he looked at me with pleading eyes, please, Cecily, won't you wear it? I felt a nerve twitch somewhere in my body. Bronte came out to smooth things over, Cecily, Barnaby's already taken his off, don't refuse. Just put it on, just in case. I took the t-shirt from his hand and put it on, then grabbed my surfboard. Ignoring Bronte's teasing voice and the gaze of a certain someone behind me, I strode towards the sea, just wanting to cool off in the water. The thrill and excitement of surfing, along with the joy of catching a challenging wave, can be addictive. It's also easy to overestimate oneself, always wanting to challenge bigger waves. So, when I was violently pulled into the water due to misjudging the slope of the wave face and its height, I felt a pang of regret, failed again. When I resurfaced, I saw Bronte and the others anxiously rushing towards me from afar, while Barnaby was already waist-deep in the water. Once I got back to shore, Bronte, with red eyes, slapped my shoulder and shouted, "Cecily Fairclough, how many times have I told you not to seek thrills by catching dangerous waves? You scared me to death just now." She called me by my full name, so she must have been really angry. I apologetically tugged at her hand. "I'm sorry." Bronte didn't shake off my hand after all, but turned to scold Barnaby. "And you can't even swim, what were you rushing into the sea for? Were you going to rescue her or get yourself killed?" Agatha hugged Bronte, comforting her softly. "Everyone's fine, that's what matters most." Only then did I turn my gaze to Barnaby, who had been silently staring at me from the beginning. His face was pale, lips tightly pressed together, chest heaving violently. After a long while, he spoke in a hoarse voice. "Do you really, truly, not have anything to care about?" My heart skipped a beat, surprised both by his sensitivity and his intelligence. Just from the small incident in Bronte's few words, Barnaby had seen right through me. Although Barnaby was younger than me, under his gaze mixed with heartache, disappointment, and lingering fear, the thoughts I hadn't even delved into myself were now exposed. My throat tightened, my hanging hand grasped at the air. Avoiding the question, I explained in a low voice. "In the future, don't rush over recklessly like that. I'm a very strong swimmer, I know what I'm doing. You..." Barnaby's eyes widened, as if truly angry, and he turned and walked away. This seemed to be the first time he had lost his temper. I lagged behind, fingers fiddling with the hem of the t-shirt, wondering to myself, he doesn't even want his shirt back? Over the next few days, I managed to appease Bronte, but not Barnaby. I couldn't give him an answer to that question. Some things, once said, can be hurtful. Although he was angry, he would still follow by my side when we went out, just silent, as if pondering something. On the last day of our holiday, the four of us sat by the sea watching the sunset. Bronte was whispering in Agatha's arms, and I tactfully walked to another rock. Barnaby followed, sitting down beside me, quietly watching the sinking sun. The moment the orange sun disappeared below the horizon, the young man beside me turned to look at me. "Cecily, when we get back, I'm going to learn how to swim." A simple sentence, spoken with such seriousness. As dusk fell, I heard myself softly reply, "All right." Not long after the summer holiday ended, it was Barnaby Eastham's birthday. I had asked him in advance if he wanted to go somewhere to celebrate. But the young lad shook his head, saying he'd prefer to stay at home and invite Bronte and Agatha over. I didn't have any particular feelings about birthdays, which many people consider a ritual-filled occasion, so I let him arrange it as he wished. However, occasionally at the studio, I would catch Bronte making mysterious phone calls. And at home, Barnaby would be glued to his mobile, seemingly chatting non-stop with someone after returning from school. It wasn't until the weekend of Barnaby's birthday that I finally cottoned on to what they had been plotting. That afternoon, Bronte and Agatha insisted on dragging me halfway across the city to buy a cake from a specific bakery. But I couldn't help wondering, if this was for Barnaby's birthday, why was he involved in the planning too? Shouldn't we be the ones preparing surprises for the birthday boy? By the time we returned home with the cake, dusk had fallen. At the front door, Bronte stopped me from ringing the doorbell, insisting I use my key instead. Reluctantly, unable to resist her, I pulled out my key in confusion. As I turned the key and pushed open the door, I saw that the lights inside were off. Candles lined both sides of the hallway, extending all the way to the living room. In the flickering candlelight, Barnaby stood holding a bouquet of flowers, looking straight at me. I froze in place, momentarily unable to process the scene. Bronte gave me a gentle push from behind, saying with a smile, "Go on in, then." At that moment, I suddenly understood what was happening, and my mood instantly soured. I turned away, saying, "Are you two in on this nonsense as well?" The smile on Bronte's face froze as she tugged at my arm awkwardly. "Why are you being so serious?" Young Barnaby prepared all this specially to confess his feelings to you today. Bronte. I cut her off sharply. Agatha, sensing the tension, pulled Bronte back and shook her head at her. Throughout this, I hadn't looked at Barnaby once. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, and I couldn't bear to stay any longer. I just remembered I have some work to finish at the studio. You lot go ahead and eat. Hurried footsteps sounded behind me, followed by the living room lights being switched on. Cecily! Barnaby's voice was filled with panic, and I found myself stopping. Today, I thought since it's my birthday, I'd do a bit of decorating at home. As for the flowers, they were a freebie from the new florists at the supermarket. I was just looking at them when you all came back. His voice grew quieter towards the end. He was explaining, but also lying. Agatha stepped in to smooth things over. Surely work can wait for one evening. Let's have dinner together to celebrate Barnaby's birthday. I sighed inwardly and turned to face Barnaby. Happy birthday. He breathed a sigh of relief and hurried to clear away the candles in the living room, muttering, I'll just put these away. I've made some fish and chips too. I felt a mix of emotions, unsure of how to handle the situation. The dinner was somewhat tense. Finally, we reached the birthday cake and wish-making part. During the 30 seconds he closed his eyes to make a wish, I studied his face intently. Barnaby's features had matured, exuding a unique quality between boyhood and manhood. For a moment, I felt disoriented, meeting his gaze for a second as he opened his eyes before looking away. I took out the gift I had prepared from my bag and handed it to him. May your future be bright. It was a simple wristwatch, one he had paused to look at for a few seconds during a previous shopping trip. A flash of delight crossed his eyes, and when he looked back at me, his gaze was intense, making me inexplicably nervous. After dinner, Barnaby and Agatha were tidying up in the kitchen while Bronte and I relaxed on the balcony loungers. She suddenly spoke up. You already knew, didn't you? I stared at the city lights twinkling in the night sky and let out a long sigh. He's still young. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's of legal age now. His past experiences have made him more mature than his peers. He knows exactly what he wants. It's you who doesn't understand your own heart. That watch you gave him tonight, it wasn't cheap, was it? I smiled dismissively. It's just a watch. But Bronte persisted. What exactly are you worried about? I took a deep breath and spoke slowly. I gave him a helping hand when he was alone and desperate. He's loyal and grateful, and he's confused that gratitude with something else. I'm several years older than him. How can I stand by and watch him make such a mistake? He has a long future ahead of him. He'll see more of the world and meet many more people. Then he'll realize how insignificant his current, limited choice is. Moreover, his mother is my friend. You're right, but also wrong, Bronte said seriously. From start to finish, you've been thinking about his future, even using your age as an excuse to dismiss a young person's sincere feelings. In the end, you still see him as a child, not realizing that he might be more emotionally mature than you in some ways. You're just a coward. Finally, as she left arm in arm with Agatha, she didn't spare me a glance, instead chatting and laughing with Barnaby. Agatha gave me an apologetic smile, and I waved it off helplessly. After seeing them off, the room suddenly fell silent. I still felt a bit uncomfortable and was about to return to my room when Barnaby called out to me. Cecily, I've decided what I want for that wish you granted me at the beach earlier. His words rooted me to the spot, my nerves taut. Barnaby moved in front of me and suddenly flashed a brilliant smile. Don't be afraid. I was amused by his casual remark, relaxing a bit. I glanced away, then nonchalantly looked back, raising my eyes to meet his. He smiled warmly and sincerely. I wish for you to have a life of peace and prosperity, with all your desires fulfilled. What? I instinctively thought I had misheard, but his expression told me he was serious. It felt as if someone had gently tickled my heart with a feather. I averted my gaze. The birthday wish was meant for you, not for me. He glanced down at the watch I had given him on his wrist and changed the subject. Time is quite unforgiving. No matter how much one tries to catch up, those few years' difference always remain. But just now, I suddenly realized that asking time to stop moving forward is an unfair request. Time shouldn't wait for anyone, but it does give everyone a chance. You know, I'm very patient. This rambling speech ended with Barnaby saying, "I'm going to wash the dishes in the kitchen," and gently letting it go. That night, I couldn't sleep. Barnaby's exam scores were very high, more than enough to get into his target university. But he suddenly told me he was planning to apply to a local university instead. I was confused but patiently asked him, "Didn't you want to go to the best law school? With your scores, it's completely doable. Why have you suddenly changed your mind?" He hesitated for a long while before saying softly, "That school is in another city." So what? I couldn't understand why it mattered whether the school was in another city or not. He wasn't the type to be unclear about such things. Barnaby looked over at me, and with that one glance, I understood what he was worried about. I turned to look out the living room balcony window, my tone calm. "Do you remember what you said on your birthday last year?" His voice was a bit hoarse, but he still answered, "I do." I smiled slightly. "That's good. You're still young, you should go out and see the wider world. You'll meet more wonderful people, and then you'll realize that you actually have many choices. Go and see more, all right?" Barnaby's breathing became uneven, but he didn't speak. I leaned over and hugged him gently. "This time, be good, okay?" He seemed to be crying, his voice trembling. "Okay, I promise you, I'll go and see. But I'll use time to show you my answer and my choice." On the day Barnaby left for university, I didn't go to the airport to see him off. My days returned to how they were when I was alone before, except I found myself daydreaming more often at home. We still kept in touch, mostly with him sending several long voice messages about his situation, and me occasionally replying with a few words. We maintained a different kind of unspoken balance between us. Later, during every holiday, Barnaby would go to different places. He started a TikTok account, recording the local customs and practices along his journeys. At the end of each video, he would appear alone in front of the camera, softly saying, "If only you were here." Gradually, people started guessing in the comments that the blogger must have someone he liked. Bronte sent me screenshots of those comments, adding, "Wonder when a certain someone will finally come to their senses." I didn't reply, but watched the video again and saved it. By his third year, Barnaby had the opportunity to follow his university professors in providing legal aid to disadvantaged groups. His videos began to feature different groups of people, different perspectives, and different thoughts. I watched him transform step by step, becoming an independent and excellent adult. Just before the fourth-year graduation ceremony, Barnaby posted a photo on Facebook. It was the watch I had given him years ago, with the caption, "Time isn't the answer, but the answer is hidden in time." I went to Barnaby's mother's grave, leaned against her tombstone, slowly finished a bottle of wine, and didn't say a word. On the day of the graduation ceremony, I went to Barnaby's university. This time, I stood at the school gate and called him. It connected after one ring, and Barnaby's voice was nervous yet expectant. "Where are you?" I laughed softly. "At the school gate." There was suddenly no sound on the other end of the phone, then wind and breathing. A few minutes later, Barnaby appeared in my line of sight. He had come running, and when his eyes locked onto me, it was as if he let out a long-held breath. Then he walked towards me, step by step. "I have something to tell you," he said firmly, but with a hint of shyness. I want to make it official." I looked at him. "I agree." He seemed not to have processed it, asking blankly, "What?" I held back a smile and repeated, "I said I agree." The next second, to the astonished gazes of onlookers, he pulled me into his arms, asking over and over, "Really? Really?" Finally, I had no choice but to stand on tiptoe and silence him with a kiss.